Before we begin, if you're listening to this alone at night, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained events uploaded every day. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get into tonight's stories. The first thing people imagine when you mention a lake house is peace. Morning fog over the water, coffee on the deck, fishing before sunrise. No traffic, no neighbors close enough to bother you. That's exactly why my parents rented one every summer. For almost 15 years, we stayed on different lakes across the Midwest. Nothing bad ever happened. Until the summer we rented a place on Black Ash Lake. Even now, I don't tell people the name of the lake when I tell this story. Mostly because I don't want anyone trying to find the house. And partly because I'm not convinced it's still there. This happened in August of 2021. I was 26. My younger brother Ryan had just graduated college, and my parents wanted one last family vacation before everyone got busy with work. The rental looked perfect online. A 2-story cedar house. Private dock. Small fishing boat. No nearby homes except one cabin almost half a mile across the lake. Exactly what we wanted. It took nearly an hour after leaving the highway before we reached it. The last 15 minutes were on an old gravel road that barely looked maintained. Cell service disappeared about halfway there. The GPS stopped updating shortly after that. The rental confirmation simply said, "Continue until the road ends." It did. The lake appeared through the trees, calm enough to look like glass. The house sat only 30 feet from the shoreline. Weathered cedar siding, green metal roof, large windows facing the water. It looked older than the listing photos, but still beautiful. The owner wasn't there. He'd left the key inside a lockbox on the porch. A handwritten note waited underneath. It read, "Please leave the dock lights on after sunset." Nothing else. No welcome message. No Wi-Fi password. Just that one sentence. My dad laughed. Probably keeps boats from hitting the dock. Made sense. At least then. The first day was exactly what you'd expect. We unpacked, cooked dinner, took the boat around the lake. The water was unbelievably quiet. No jet skis, no speedboats, hardly any wildlife. In 4 hours, we saw one fisherman nearly a mile away. He never waved, never looked toward us, just kept rowing. That evening, we switched on the dock lights before going inside. The bulbs cast long yellow reflections across the water. I stayed on the deck for another hour while everyone else watched television. The lake barely moved. It almost didn't feel real. Around 10, I noticed something. Way out near the middle of the lake. Another light. Small. White. Not moving. I assumed it belonged to another dock. Or a boat. I watched it for several minutes. Eventually, it disappeared. Not gradually. Just gone. I figured someone had switched off a flashlight. Nothing more. The second night, I saw it again. Same location. Same white light. Only this time, it seemed closer. Still too far away to identify. Ryan joined me outside. "What's that?" "I don't know." We watched it together. Without warning, the light blinked 3 times, then disappeared. Ryan laughed. "Someone's messing with us." Maybe. The next morning, we rented kayaks from a marina on the opposite side of the lake. While paying, the owner asked where we were staying. When my dad described the location, the man paused. "You mean the old Jensen place?" Dad nodded. The owner looked toward the lake for a second, then quietly asked, "Did they tell you about the lights?" Dad smiled. "What lights?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Never mind." He changed the subject immediately. At the time, none of us thought much about it. That afternoon, the weather changed. Clouds rolled in. The wind picked up. We spent most of the evening inside playing cards. Around 9, the power flickered once. Then again. My mom looked out the kitchen window. The dock lights are off. Dad grabbed a flashlight and went outside. Less than a minute later, he came back inside. "They're working now." "What happened?" "No idea." He looked strangely distracted, almost like he'd forgotten why he'd gone outside. When I asked if everything was okay, he simply nodded, but he didn't finish his sentence. Around midnight, I woke because someone was walking across the deck. Slow, steady footsteps. Not loud, just enough to hear through the bedroom window. I assumed Dad couldn't sleep. I looked outside. Nobody. The deck was empty. The footsteps continued anyway, from one end of the house to the other, then stopped directly beneath my window. I held my breath. Nothing happened for almost a minute. Then, one slow knock. Not on the front door. On the sliding glass door downstairs, 3 floors below my room. One knock. Silence. Another knock. Ryan opened his bedroom door. "You hear that?" I nodded. Dad came into the hallway. "Stay upstairs." He grabbed the flashlight, walked downstairs, unlocked the back door, shined the light toward the dock. Nobody. The lake remained perfectly still. Then Dad quietly said something that still bothers me. "The lights are off again." None of us had turned them off. The next morning, I walked down to the dock by myself. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The wetwood showed footprints. Bare footprints. Walking from the end of the dock, toward the house. There weren't any footprints going the other direction, only coming in. I called Dad outside. By the time he reached me, they were gone. The wood had already dried. He looked at me like he wanted to believe me, but there wasn't anything left to show him. That afternoon, I found an old guest book inside one of the living room cabinets. Most visitors had left short messages. "Beautiful lake. Amazing fishing. We'll definitely come back." Normal vacation stuff. Then I noticed something odd. Over several years, different guests had written almost the exact same sentence. "We saw the light." No explanation. Just, "We saw the light." The entries stopped abruptly 3 years earlier. The remaining pages were blank. I showed Ryan. He smiled. Creepy marketing. Maybe it was. Maybe not. That evening, just before sunset, the owner finally stopped by. An older man in his 70s. Friendly enough. He asked whether everything was all right. Dad mentioned the dock lights. The old man looked toward the water, then quietly said, "Whatever happens, don't switch them off." He climbed back into his truck before anyone could ask why. That night, none of us forgot. We left the lights on. All 4 of them. Around 11:30, the white light appeared again. Only now, it wasn't in the middle of the lake. It was just beyond the end of our dock, floating a few feet above the water. Not attached to anything. No boat. No person. Just one quiet white light. Ryan whispered, "What is that?" Nobody answered. The light remained there for nearly 5 minutes. Then, very slowly, it moved backward, gliding across the lake, without making a ripple, without a sound, until it disappeared into the darkness. We packed before sunrise the next morning. Nobody suggested staying another night. Nobody argued. Dad called the owner to say we were leaving early. The old man simply replied, "I figured." About 6 months later, I searched online for the rental. The listing had disappeared. The address no longer existed. Even satellite images showed nothing but trees where the house had been. Maybe the owner sold it. Maybe the maps were wrong. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that every now and then, usually just before I fall asleep, I'll remember that quiet white light, waiting beyond the dock, not coming closer, not going away, just waiting. If you've ever rented a lake house, you've probably looked across the water and wondered who lives in the other cabins. Most of the time, it's families, retired couples, people looking for a quiet weekend away. Sometimes, the cabins are empty. When my wife and I rented a lake house in northern Maine, there was only one other cabin we could see. It sat directly across the lake, too far away to make out any details, just close enough that we could see its porch every evening. The property manager told us something that seemed strange at the time. The cabin's been empty for years. That would have been easy to believe, if I hadn't watched someone standing on its porch every single night. This happened in September of 2022. My wife, Emily, and I had both been working nonstop for months. We wanted somewhere completely disconnected from everything. No tourists, no crowds, just a quiet lake surrounded by trees. The rental looked perfect. A small cedar house built on a rocky shoreline. Private dock, canoe, fire pit, no neighbors nearby. At least, that's what the listing claimed. Technically, it wasn't lying. There was only one neighboring cabin. It just happened to be across the lake. We arrived just before sunset. The drive had taken nearly 6 hours. By the time we'd unpacked, the sky had already turned orange. Emily stepped onto the deck first. "Look," she pointed across the water. A cabin stood on the opposite shore. Old, dark green paint, metal roof, large screened porch facing directly toward us. It looked abandoned, except someone stood on the porch, too far away to identify, perfectly still, watching the lake. I waved. No response. After a few seconds, the figure quietly stepped back into the shadows. "Guess we do have neighbors." Emily shrugged. "Maybe." The next morning, the porch was empty. No car, no boat tied to the dock, no smoke from the chimney, nothing. We spent the day kayaking around the shoreline. Out of curiosity, I suggested paddling toward the other cabin. Emily laughed. "Let's not be those people." Fair enough. We stayed on our side of the lake. That evening, just before sunset, the figure returned. Same porch, same spot, standing completely still. I grabbed my binoculars. The lenses finally brought the cabin into focus. The porch looked weathered. Several screens had torn loose. One rocking chair sat against the wall. The figure was gone. I lowered the binoculars. There it was again, standing exactly where it had been before. I raised them. Gone. Lowered them. Back. I tried 3 more times. Same result. Emily watched me. "What?" I don't know." She took the binoculars. Looked. "I don't see anyone." I looked with my own eyes. The figure remained on the porch, motionless. Emily handed the binoculars back. "The porch is empty." Neither of us mentioned it again that night. The following afternoon, we stopped at a small bait shop about 15 minutes away. The owner asked where we were staying. When I mentioned the lake, he nodded, then asked, "On the west shore?" "Yeah." He paused. "You can see the old Campbell place from there." "I guess so. Anybody staying there?" I shrugged. "I've seen someone." The old man slowly shook his head. "That place hasn't had electricity in almost 10 years. He didn't elaborate. Neither did I. That night, heavy rain moved in. The lake disappeared beneath thick fog. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Around 10, Emily noticed something through the living room window. A light. Across the lake, a single yellow light glowed inside the abandoned cabin. Not bright, just enough to illuminate one window. I grabbed the binoculars again. The window was dark. Lowered them. The light returned. It made absolutely no sense. Around midnight, I woke because someone was knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door. On the side of the house facing the lake. I looked outside. Nothing. Only rain. Then, another 3 knocks. Emily sat up. "You heard that?" I nodded. We stayed in bed. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The next morning, the rain had cleared. I walked down to our dock. Halfway there, I noticed muddy footprints. Not on the dock. On our deck, leading from the lake to the sliding glass door. Bare footprints. Adult-sized. They stopped at the glass, then turned around, walking back toward the water. No boat marks. No tire tracks. Nothing else. I called Emily outside. She stared silently for several seconds, then quietly asked, "How would someone even get here?" I didn't have an answer. That afternoon, curiosity finally won. I launched the canoe. Emily stayed behind. The paddle across the lake took nearly 20 minutes. The abandoned cabin looked even older up close. Broken windows, peeling paint, collapsed dock. No sign anyone had lived there recently. The front door hung slightly open. I called out. No answer. Inside, everything sat beneath years of dust. Old furniture, a wood stove, books still resting on shelves. Nobody. Then, I noticed something strange. On the dining room table sat a ceramic coffee mug. Steam rose from it. Fresh. Hot. I backed out immediately. Didn't look around again. Didn't call out. Just returned to the canoe. Emily could tell something had happened. I didn't tell her about the coffee. Not until years later. I knew how unbelievable it sounded. That evening, we packed. Our reservation still had 3 days left. Neither of us wanted to stay. While loading the car, I looked across the lake one final time. The porch was empty. Then, just before I closed the trunk, someone stepped onto it. The same figure, standing perfectly still, facing us. Emily froze beside me. "You see it too?" For the first time, she nodded. Neither of us waved. Neither of us spoke. We got into the car and left. About a year later, I searched online for the property. The rental still existed. Same photographs. Same description. One thing had changed. The image of the lake no longer showed another cabin. Just trees. I zoomed in several times. Nothing. No porch. No dock. No roof. Like it had never been there. Last summer, Emily surprised me by suggesting another lake vacation. Different state. Different cabin. Everything was perfect. Until the second evening. I stepped onto the deck with a cup of coffee. Across the lake, barely visible through the trees, stood a weathered green cabin, with someone quietly waiting on the porch, watching our side of the water. Every lake has its own routine. People launch their boats early, fish until sunset, tie everything to the dock before dark. If you spend enough time around the water, you start recognizing every boat on the lake. That's why the one aluminum fishing boat bothered me so much. It appeared every night, always after sunset, always moving across the middle of the lake, always with one person sitting perfectly still in the stern. The strange part wasn't seeing the boat. It was that every marina around the lake insisted it hadn't belonged to anyone for almost 20 years. This happened during October of 2020. After months of working remotely, I rented a small lake house outside northern Michigan for 2 weeks. The season was almost over. Most summer homes were already empty. The trees had started changing color. Cold mornings, quiet afternoons, exactly what I wanted. The rental sat at the end of a dirt road with only 2 neighboring properties. Both were vacant for the season. The nearest marina was almost 10 miles away. By the second day, I hadn't seen another person. The lake itself wasn't very large, maybe 3 miles across. From the dock, I could see nearly the entire shoreline. Most evenings, I'd sit outside with a cup of coffee until it became too cold. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no city lights, just water. The first time I noticed the boat, I almost ignored it. The sun had just disappeared below the trees. A small aluminum fishing boat drifted quietly across the middle of the lake. No motor noise, no wake, just gliding. One man sat near the back. Dark jacket, baseball cap, hands resting in his lap. I figured he'd been fishing late. Nothing unusual. The second evening, the same boat appeared. Same direction, same speed, same man, still sitting perfectly motionless. I watched until it disappeared behind a narrow point on the opposite shore. I never saw it come back. On the third morning, I stopped by the marina to buy bait. While paying, I casually mentioned the fisherman. The older man behind the counter frowned. "What kind of boat?" "Old aluminum one. Out around sunset." He looked toward the lake through the front window, then quietly asked, "Did you hear the motor?" I thought about it. "No." He nodded slowly. "You wouldn't." Before I could ask why, another customer walked in. The conversation ended. That night, I waited on the dock before sunset. Exactly 12 minutes after the sun disappeared, the boat emerged from behind the trees. Right on time. No engine, no paddles moving. It simply crossed the lake. I grabbed my binoculars. The boat came into focus. The man wasn't fishing. There weren't any fishing rods. No tackle box. No life jacket. He simply sat there, looking straight ahead. His hands never moved. His head never turned. Then, halfway across the lake, the boat stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Perfectly still, as though it had reached an invisible line. After about 30 seconds, it continued moving, exactly the same speed as before. The next afternoon, I rented a small fishing boat from the marina, mostly because I wanted to prove there was a reasonable explanation. I waited until sunset, positioned my boat near the center of the lake, then watched. The aluminum boat appeared again. Only this time, it passed less than 50 yards away, close enough that I should have recognized the man's face. I didn't. His baseball cap covered most of it. His head remained lowered. As he drifted past, I called out, "Evening." No response. Not even a glance. The boat continued across the water, without making a sound. Something else bothered me. The surface of the lake reflected everything around it. Trees, clouds, my boat, but not his. There was no reflection beneath it, only dark water. I headed back before dark. I didn't enjoy being out there anymore. The following day, the property owner stopped by to check the furnace. While he worked, I asked whether many people still fished that late in the year. He shrugged. Not really. Then I described the aluminum boat. His expression changed immediately. He quietly asked, "Does he stop in the middle?" I hadn't mentioned that. He leaned against the counter. Years earlier, a local man had gone missing while fishing before winter. Search teams found his empty boat drifting near the center of the lake. Officially, they assumed he'd fallen overboard. His body was never recovered. The boat disappeared shortly afterward. No one knew what happened to it, at least officially. That night, heavy fog rolled across the lake. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Around 8, I heard something outside, water gently tapping against my dock. I looked through the window. The aluminum boat floated beside it, no more than 10 feet away. The man still sat in the stern, head lowered, perfectly still. I couldn't see his face. The boat remained there for almost 5 minutes. Then, without anyone touching it, it slowly drifted backward into the fog, completely silent. I barely slept. The next morning, I walked to the dock. Something rested on the last wooden plank. A small metal fishing lure. Old. Rusty. Its hook had broken years earlier. Attached to it was a faded paper tag. Only 3 words remained readable. "Return before dark." I put the lure in my pocket. I still have it. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because throwing it away didn't feel right. My final evening at the lake arrived sooner than expected. The car was packed. The house cleaned. I sat on the dock one last time, watching the sunset, waiting. Sure enough, the aluminum boat appeared, exactly on schedule, halfway across the lake. It stopped. The man slowly lifted his head. For the first time, he looked directly toward me. Even from that distance, I could tell he wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He simply looked tired. After several seconds, he raised one hand, not waving, more like pointing, toward the shoreline behind me. I turned instinctively. Nobody stood there. When I looked back, the boat was gone. The lake was empty, not disappearing into the fog, not hidden behind trees. Just gone. I left before sunrise the next morning. Halfway home, I stopped for coffee at a gas station. A local newspaper sat near the register. The front page showed a photograph of the lake after recent storms. Something caught my eye. Far in the background, near the middle of the water, was a tiny aluminum fishing boat. The caption underneath simply read, "Officials remind boaters not to remain on the lake after sunset." No explanation. Just that. I've rented other lake houses since then. Different states, different lakes, different seasons. Most evenings, I'll still sit on the dock for a while before going inside. Most lakes become completely empty after dark. Most. But every now and then, just after the sun disappears, I'll notice a small aluminum boat quietly crossing the water. No engine, no sound. One tired man sitting in the stern, still making the same trip. He never quite managed to finish.